Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to the live stream today, and we hope you're having a great Thursday. I'm Jiaxing from the Google Developer Relations team, and welcome to our 8th edition of Startup Coffee Chat at Google Developer Space. Startup Coffee Chat is a monthly event to bring startups across Southeast Asia to share best practices and learn from one another. And this month, our topic is on product management in Fintech. We are super excited to have two great speakers with us. The first speaker for today will be Joe Contini. He's the head of product from Zendit. Joe serves as the head of product for Zendit, a fintech company that provides payment solutions and simplifies the payment process for businesses in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia. And next, we have Christine So, the group product manager at Wise. Christine is a seasoned product leader with over 10 years of experience building successful consumer tech products in the games, marketplace, and fintech industry. And for today's session, we will be discussing about building products in a regulated environment, career growth in product management roles, and managing stakeholders across cross-functional teams and more. Thank you so much for submitting your questions through the registration. And you're also welcome to submit your questions through YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're tuning in from, and we'll do our best to answer them. So without further ado, let's invite Christine and Joe up to our virtual stage. Hi, Christine and Joe.
Hey there.
Hey, thanks so much for having us.
Really awesome to have the both of you here with us today. And yeah, let's get the ball rolling. So just a couple of quick self-introductory questions. Yeah, could you share with us how you got into product management? Christine and Joe, feel free to take it away.
Sure, I can start. I've done product for the last 10 years, but I actually started off in program management or project management. I was responsible for making sure that the projects were executed on time. Through that, built a lot of trust with the same stakeholders. And then over time, when the PM role opened at the company, I was able to transition over. And so that was me. And ever since then, I've been building consumer products.
Nice. What about you, Joe?
And from my side, I started on the more technical side. I was a web developer for a couple of years, and then sort of became a business analyst, which is like a product manager. You're between engineering and the client-facing business folks. So I've kind of always liked that area. I was too introverted to be full-out sales, but too extroverted to be full-on engineering. And so product management was sort of nice in the middle for my personality. And yeah, I just kind of went from a web developer to a business analyst to solutioning, and then becoming a product manager about almost 5 years ago.
Wow, nice. Yeah, Willie is tuning in, and he said, way to go, Joe. Thanks for joining us, Willie. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, the next question we have is, could you share with us how product management in fintech is different from other verticals? Maybe Christine, you can take this since you have dabbled in the other verticals.
Yes, I've been in gaming with PlayStation, and then I moved to real estate marketplace, and then with fintech in the last few years. I would say, from a product management perspective, you're still solving customer problems, right? Ultimately, your role doesn't really change with regards to being the customer advocate first and foremost. But in terms of fintech and product management, I think within fintech, I probably spend more time with a different set of stakeholders as compared to marketplace and games previously. And those stakeholders include people from banking. In those companies, we didn't have a banking role. In our company, banking helps with really navigating regulatory conversations, helping with licenses and expansion topics. I also work a lot more with compliance, right? With fintech, we're working with financial products, which are heavily regulated. So making sure that we understand the rules and that we kind of grow alongside the evolution of the current rules, and also working with the regulators to understand that.
Nice. What about Joe?
I think Christine explained probably most of what I was going to say as well. That is really the key difference, is that you can't just write code and push something to production and have a product. You have to do lots of work building partnerships with financial institutions, banks, regulators, and just local financial infrastructure to be able to actually offer your product. Right, you're not just moving data, you're moving money, and so there's a lot of pre-work involved in getting all the licenses and the partnerships and building the trust with the financial institutions to be able to do this in a way that really scales. And obviously, I think another big one is we're working with probably one of the most sensitive types of data, which is money. And everyone understands money. Every business and person has had some interactions with money. And so we can't just have downtime like maybe an early social media app can. It's so important to have invest in scalability and reliability, probably a lot more than a lot of other like B2C apps.
Yeah. And I think that brings us, that gives us a great segue into our next sort of category that we want to talk about, the regulatory environment, building products in a regulated environment. So could you share some challenges that you faced? Maybe Christine, you can go first. Yeah.
Challenges faced. I mean, I think one thing is that we rely on external partners quite heavily, right? So that means that sometimes your time to market is going to be dependent on the external partner as well, which means your project timelines can be more complicated. There's a little bit more, a lot more work streams that you have to manage in order to ship. So balancing that out, you need to factor in buffer time to actually ship the products. Whereas I think in like the marketplace product that I was managing, there wasn't any dependency on external partners, and it was mostly controlled in-house. So, we could run experiments much faster, and then the shipping time was also much faster. But yeah, if anytime you have an external dependencies, that kind of means a little bit more time you have to take to make sure that things are in good shape before you can launch.
So from your experience, like working with the regulatory partners, what were some maybe, let's say, unexpected challenges that you faced? Because I think lead time is definitely one. Not knowing when certain things get approved, when entering new markets, new partners that you're working with. Other than, let's say, lead time, what are some other challenges that you faced?
Joe, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I think, every industry, especially every regulated industry, is going to have its own challenges, but those challenges are often opportunities as well. There's just different environments. So, for example, as I mentioned before, you have to do more than just, do the design and development and deployment. You have to do a lot of pre-work, and especially in our industry, that's a lot of security, it's a lot of licenses, certifications. And we have to comply with them for our own good as well as the good of our customers. But there's opportunities there too. So some of the challenges you might say, I have to wait. The code's ready to go, but I have to wait 4 months, 6 months before I can launch this in a compliant manner. But it also is an opportunity because one, it sort of provides a competitive moat. It gives you a head start because everyone else in the industry is going to have to do the same. And in a way, there's actually a lot of opportunities in working with the regulators. So, for example, in Indonesia, as a lot of countries are doing now, but Indonesia's sort of been pretty quick recently to launch a QR code standard because there's so many different e-wallets popping up in Indonesia. So Bank Indonesia launched QR payment code standard to allow interoperability for merchants to be able to have one QR code and accept payments from so many e-wallets and financial institutions. So that ended up being a benefit for us because we could have one integration with QRIS system and then accept, rather than have to build integrations to, tens or even hundreds of financial institutions, one integration allows us to accept payments from, hundreds of banks, partners as well. So there's it can seem challenging, but there's also a lot of benefits.
Nice. Thanks a lot for both your insights. Let's move on to maybe talk a bit more about localization, seeing that both Zendeed and Wise are in more than one market. So how do you manage the complexity of extensive localization in various markets? Maybe Christine?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's important first, like, what does localization mean, right? I think there's some people can think of it as just changing copy on a website. Some people think of it as really adopting the product so that the people of Australia use it in the way that Australians would use it versus people in Singapore. So I'm going to explain how we take care of localization from the latter perspective, which is beyond copy changes. What does it take to build a product that resonates with the Australian market? And for us, a big part of that focus is on making sure that they have the best onboarding experience possible. So when I say onboarding, I mean everything from the value proposition that we share on the homepage all the way through to their sign-up experience and to the documents that we ask them for before they can be on board as a customer. All of this is done through careful understanding of what are the requirements from a regulatory perspective to bring them up, to onboard them, and also what would make it super seamless. So we definitely prioritize making sure that the experience is very, very easy to use, and that people can use the product as fast as possible. So thinking through local providers that we can integrate with in order to onboard the customer in each local market is a crucial part of that process. And you'll see in Singapore, for example, we've also integrated with SingPass. So customers signing up for an account in Singapore market would go through the SingPass experience, making it super convenient to onboard. That's another example of how we've kind of extended the localization aspect to the Singapore market.
Nice. So I think it's also thinking beyond just language copy changes, but how people in the different markets will tend to use apps, I guess, and what is the best experience for them to use your product. Thanks a lot. What about Joe? For you, since Zendit is in Indonesia, Philippines, and Southeast Asia, what are some differences you observe between the different markets? How do you make sure your product is localized?
Well, I think as Christine mentioned, Wise has done so much more localization globally than we have. We're only in 2 countries, and they're, I think, at least a magnitude more than we are. But that said, just going between the 2 countries, Philippines and Indonesia, like you said, it's way more than just the language, and it's the UX. It's especially the onboarding. Some for practical reasons, there's different legal requirements for the documents that you need to collect from folks. The way you do KYC, KYB, know your customer, due diligence, background checks is going to be different. And even the type of information that you can ask is different as well. So you really have to tailor that whole onboarding experience. And then, of course, once they're in, it's what can they actually do, which is very much, in fintech, we're hyper-local players, right? So the experience is really going to depend on the country you're in, in our case, the payment methods that are available, right? So, for example, in the Philippines, we're integrated with 7-Eleven, but in Indonesia, we're integrated with, Alfamart and Indomaret. There's just different players, different e-wallets, and different methods as well. You'll find some markets, and beyond just that, it's what people are comfortable with too. We all talk about product market fit, but I also like to think of product culture fit. And there's going to be each country and even parts of the country will have different cultures in terms of how they approach security versus convenience. So, for example, in the U.S., Americans are generally very impatient, and they're happy to sacrifice security for convenience, which is why Amazon has a one-click checkout in the US. There is no OTP, because if they were to add OTP, that is so much friction that people would just go to other sites. You cannot be bothered to enter an OTP in the US. It's seen as crazy. Whereas here in Southeast Asia, people are so used to OTPs that if you try to take it away, people might feel that it's insecure, and they'll actually want that OTP back. So, and that's just one sort of really, a drastic example, but it varies very much, on a country by country basis. And the timing, as fintech is so hot right now, so there's so many companies coming in and they're educating the market, and what people were uncomfortable with 2 years ago, they might be expecting today, because of just the rapidly changing environment. So it's about really, looking into the terminology, And then also not just your product interfaces, but your marketing as well, right? So your blog posts, any campaigns that you do.
Nice. Yeah, I have fallen victim to the one-click payment. So much money has gone down the drain because it's so convenient to use. Thanks a lot for sharing. And let's switch gears a little. Let's talk about stakeholder management. As PMs, you work with so many different teams across your organizations. And let's share a little about which teams you work most closely with, and what are some best practices that you find useful?
Sure. So I can talk about at Wise who I work the most with. So definitely engineering, because we need to build the things we want to ship. The operation teams, so they're the ones that make sure that payments can be processed as fast as possible, make sure there's no hiccups, things like that, helping with any issues with verification. Banking team, so these are the folks I spoke about earlier that help with the expansion and acquiring of licenses and things like that. And compliance risk team. So it's quite a large set of different people, but all working under the same mission, which is really awesome. In terms of best practices, I mean, I don't think what I'm going to share is so new to things of what you've learned, but I think even in the last few years, I'm still learning how to adapt my communication style to all the different groups of people across all different cultures, right? I think what's great about working in this industry is that we really have a global network and a global team, and so just learning how to be clear in your communication, knowing how to communicate to who, and setting the right expectations and boundaries. Was important for me in order to be effective in my role. And then at the end of it, it's the PM's role to unify everyone under one team, right? So making sure that you can do that in an inspiring way, and then establish shared goals cross-functionally. So that's what I love doing.
Nice. I have a follow-up question to this. So I think there are a lot of companies talking about documentations, encouraging recording of meetings, or documenting what goes on in a meeting, so that maybe people from other time zones, they can catch up on it, or people across teams, they can always refer to what was taken down in the meeting notes. So for yourself, do you find that documentation is one of the most crucial parts in your processes, or are there other ways that that you find to be more effective? Let's say video calls. Yeah.
I think it just kind of depends on the problem, right? What is the subjected problem you're trying to solve? So I guess it's a very broad question, but I think in a world where we are still operating remote first, at least in our company, we have definitely stepped up our documentation game, and we have to get good at it, because you don't want to burn people out by just being on Slack all the time, right? So learning how to operate asynchronously while making sure that the team is still energized and on the same page and interested in the work is important to find that right balance. I think there are things that can't replace relationship building, right? So that format, you still should do a coffee chat, even if it's a virtual one, to check in on your teammates if you can. But yeah, I think in a world where probably will continue to be remote for some time, it definitely makes sense to learn how to work asynchronously, and that's definitely helped in terms of also making sure that we're managing our hours across the globe.
Yep, definitely. Thanks a lot, Christine. Joe, anything to add on?
Yeah, I think I can comment sort of, general working style, and then a little bit fintech specific. Stakeholder management, especially distributed working today, is I think going to be the norm for a long time. And it does require some different skill sets, but I think the way I think about it is first about empathy and empowerment, really. So if you think about, first map out who are all your stakeholders? And these could be internal, they could be external. And stakeholders can be people that you depend on, your dependencies. They can be champions, people that want the same thing that you want and are happy to push with you. They can be vested in the outcome. Maybe they're not involved, they're not blocking, they're not championing, but they really care about the outcome. These are all stakeholders that it's important to map out, and then think about. Really try to just think about them. I recommend my staff, if they're starting a new initiative, map out who these stakeholders are in these different groups, and then think about what would be going through their head. Try to empathize with them, right? Are they depending on you? Are you depending on them? If so, when do they want to be informed of things that you're doing, or when do they want you to go ask them, for their insights, and map it out and really talk to them. Check in early, check in often, ask them what their expectations are, and really work to meet those expectations, and think about any process. As a PM, you have a lot of decision-making power, but there's a lot of downstream impacts from your decisions, especially your operations teams, right? Customer success is going to have to support your product. Sales is going to have to sell your product. You might have financial partners that rely on a certain level of business from your product, right? Maybe you've got an agreement with them, and you can route payments in different ways, and they're expecting you to move a certain amount every month. And what happens if they're underperforming? Can you drop the traffic to them, or will that violate a business agreement that you have with them? So there's so much to think about, and it really starts by mapping out your stakeholders and empathizing with them. If you're not sure, ask. And then that's sort of the empathy part, and then the empowerment part. The reason I care so much about transparency and posterity and processes that support that is because, so every time someone DMs me something and they ask me a question, I think, why are they asking me this question, right? The reason they're asking me this is because they couldn't find the answer without me. They couldn't find it. It wasn't in their onboarding training. It wasn't clear. If they have to ask me when something's happening, then maybe my roadmap isn't transparent enough or intuitive. So every time someone DMs me something, I try to ask, what was it that led to this person not being empowered, and how can I empower them, right? And that goes back to the empathy part. But then if you focus on empowerment, you think, well, it can be selfish too. You don't want to be asked the same question, 50 times every time you have new staff join, right? So, you can write the answer in Slack, but then document it and say, oh, by the way, I built a guide for you, right? And so I built different guides for different groups, and I try to bring stuff. When people ask me something and I might not know the full answer, I'll try to direct them to a public channel, or I'll say, hey, let me re-ask this in a public channel. I'll give you my answer there, but other people might have some additional input as well. And that helps for posterity of decision-making as well. I think it's super critical to default to transparency and think about posterity with any communications.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Totally agree that I think guiding people to documentation is gonna save you 50 times the trouble. But I think a lot of us, we tend to go for the short term. So sometimes it's just easier to answer that person. And if you end up, but it's also better in the long run that you have it somewhere documented. Thanks a lot for the advice, Joe. And next up, also related to stakeholder management, how do you convince stakeholders that some features are not needed and will derail the vision?
At Wise, luckily, one of our values is customer first, team, and then your ego. It's a really important value that's quite instilled in the culture of how we do things here. So everyone from not just like product team, but like customer support, operations, everyone is quite like putting the customer first ahead of anything else when we talk about what should we build first. It does start with, hey, what kind of problems does this solve for the customer, and how many customers are we talking about in terms of impact? So this is really the heart, and important to get your stakeholders behind first, right? So who are you solving the problem for? Who's the most important at this point? Mm-hmm. And then, when it comes to features that are not needed, even though maybe it does impact the customer, it's really important to figure out, maybe it's about how you frame the no, the ultimate no that you end up telling the stakeholder. So one important frame is not now, Right? So you don't have to say no, not ever, but you can focus on not now because ABC. Because right now, as part of our annual goal, we are heavily trying to double down on this particular objective. And if this particular objective is achieved, then in the next year we expect to kind of solve this secondary problem that the stakeholder has been pitching. So I think that's really helpful because you never know what happens. You could learn and experiment in the next weeks that actually this idea was a good solution to the initial objective. So it's important to sometimes allow them to still pitch, but be very clear on what objective you're trying to move and ensuring that they understand that as well. Joey, you probably see the same thing. Curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'll say this isn't something you can solve actually ever. It's going to be a practice that you will be always practicing. As new people come in, you're going to hire new people. New people are going to come in. Everyone's going to have their ideas about what should happen now. And as a PM, your hardest job this goes back to stakeholder management, right? Which is also relationship management. So it isn't how you say no. And often people just want to know why. If you can bring some more context and show them why you believe that one thing is higher priority than another, that can help a lot. And often you don't actually even need to be the one debating. You can just say, well, operations needs this and sales needs this. Sales is coming in saying, hey, can we do this? Then you can bring them and say, well, we can do that, but if you think it's higher priority, but then you have to choose what do we not do, right? So if you want to do, thing G suddenly, do we drop thing A or thing B or thing C, right? And sometimes you can work with them if they think it's higher priority and let them make the trade-off themselves. Or you can say, look, this is a huge ops burden. It's going to have to be either sales or someone in our COO team who decides to drop something, right? So what's the trade-off? We can hire more, but then we have to, bring a business case to our CEO and CTO and say, hey, we can't drop anything, therefore we need more resources. And then the person who's asking you to prioritize, they can be your ammo, right? They can be the one to make that business case, and you're just facilitating the conversation, really. You don't actually, you can just get the right people in the room and let them, the competing stakeholders, help them figure it out themselves. But I think it's also important. It can be helpful to let people know that. Often people say, oh, but wouldn't it be great if we did this? But wouldn't it be cool if we did this, right? You're going to get a lot of that. And the example I use, I don't know how this came to my mind, but I think of it as like a guy with a broken leg, right? And so someone's saying, oh, look at this guy. He could totally use a haircut, right? And like, but wouldn't he look better with a haircut? You're like, yes, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. He would absolutely look better with a haircut. But this guy is like our customer. And if he sees that we are coming to him with a haircut when he's asked us to take care of his broken leg, he is not going to be happy with us. And your customers, they keep track of what you ship. They keep track of what they've asked you to do and what you're doing. And if they see a big disconnect, like you've ignored them, you're not building what they want, and you're building other things that you think are important, they're not going to feel heard. And you're not going to build a sustainable company that way. So it's all about, again, empathy for your customers and making sure that you're building what's going to have the highest impact.
Totally agree. I think just to add on that, I think what I've noticed is that sometimes one of the most fatal mistakes in early companies is that, the perception of having to build a whole suite of features. But I'd argue that, especially in the very beginning, less is more, right? Like focus on the key and the core action you want the customer to do and solve that first before even thinking about expansion. And really remembering that, as Joe mentioned, he just wants you to fix his broken leg, not give him a haircut. That might be later down the line, but I think it's really important for effective PMs to drill down and keep the team focused on that particular problem.
Yeah, I love the analogy. I think there's another question from registration that is probably linked to this. It's asking about aligning internal and external priorities. So I think, Joe, you touched a little on this, what customers need and want versus what actually increases revenues. Yeah. What are some ways that you would align or prioritize this?
Sure. So this is going to depend a lot on how your company is funded, whether you're bootstrapping or if you're VC, right? So if you're bootstrapping and using your own funds, you're going to have to be profitable. Unless you've got, you're sitting on a bunch of cash and you can bankroll this, without revenues for 6 months, 12 months or more. If you've got the resources for that, that's one way. And then of course you focus, you balance it out. But if you're a VC-backed company or you're preparing to raise VC funding, you need to show growth metrics. It seems that in the real estate climate of the venture capital climate of the last 10 years or so, revenues aren't that big of a deal to VCs, and at your Series A, even Series B. They want to see a path to it, but Uber, IPO'd having over $1 billion losses, in a quarter. They were not revenue profitable, nor was Grab, nor was Twitter for its first 10 years, or PayPal. So a lot of the largest companies that we use now are not profitable still, and certainly weren't in their first 10 years. But the reason that they're brand names is because they focused on what people need, on what customers need, and that is the long-term play. You can find ways to monetize down the line. You need to be able to show that you have a monetization plan, and you don't want to be operating at a loss. So even though we're VC backed, we aim to be unit economic profitable for every single merchant, right? So we don't want to. We just don't want to be in a position where we have to squeeze, and make that sacrifice later. But you can always cut costs later. You can always make for more efficiencies later. And actually, this is a big thing: efficiency and effectiveness. If you're going for rapid growth, you want to focus on effectiveness, right? Everyone's going to come in and say, "Oh, isn't that duplicate work? Couldn't that be more efficient?" And the answer is yes, but it shouldn't be at that stage. Efficiency matters much more down the line. You can have a hyper efficient product that uses minimal resources. You've refactored so much. You've automated everything. But if it's not effective in terms of growth or giving the market what they want, you're putting the time in the wrong spot. Companies generally start focusing much more on efficiency in the years leading up to IPO. But when you're getting started, you need to get product market fit and just obsess over what your customers want. Get your customers to love you. Don't be taking heavy losses, but if you don't give your customers what they want, you won't have a business to earn revenue.
Yep. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. But thanks a lot, Joe, for the great tips. Now let's move on a little to about managing teams. So we have a question that asked, how do you balance between doing what's best for your team versus what's best for your product?
This really depends on what your role is, and if you're a product manager, your main focus is your product, right? And you should be doing what's best for your customers and what's best for your team. One of the hardest parts of product is that you don't actually want to be tied to your product. You don't want to be tied to your solution. You don't want to tether your identity to your product or solution, including as a founder. You want to focus on the problem. And you might find that whatever product or solution you had in mind, you have to completely throw out the door and bring in something new if you're focused on really solving the customer pain points. So focus on the customer pain points and focus on a problem. Now, in terms of doing what's best for your team, let's say you're a PM, you might not have, direct reports. It might be a matrix org where you're working with designers, QA, engineers, partnerships, and the like. You want a healthy work environment, of course. So you want to at least make sure that people are happy. You want to do pulse checks, make sure that people are enjoying their work, right? Because if you've got people resigning, then you're not going to be able to build your product, right? So people first, take care of your team, make sure everyone's doing all right. You can look at, there's lagging indicators like resignations or people taking too much leave or sick leave, but you don't want it to get there, right? Look for some leading indicators like, employee, NPS, Net Promoter Score. How happy are they? How likely would they be to recommend someone to work there? Are they bringing people into the company, right? Are they going out and championing it? Make sure you're looking at some of those leading indicators to make sure that your team is healthy first. You got to take care of yourself and your team. But then focus on your customers. Now, this changes as you grow, as you become a people manager, especially a manager of managers. Your product is your team at that point. You're making a lot less product decisions than you think. Your job is to have a happy, healthy, empowered workforce and help them get the resources that they need to succeed. And you're going to have to be able to delegate effectively and push decision-making down to the lowest level. And this is a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of first-time people managers, and even the first 5 years plus of people management. It's very hard to be comfortable pushing decision-making to the lowest level But if you can give them the information and maybe don't give yourself sort of decision rights, but veto rights, and let them make the decisions, you'll learn that very quickly. You'll be able to scale yourself and your product and your team much more effectively.
Nice. I think we have a comment that touched on a little about that. So I think you were talking about delegating or letting your team make the product decisions. So Mila asked, having a high-level role in product, how do you stay in touch with your users and their needs? Christine or Joe, feel free to take this question.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? When you think about all the different things and the limited hours in a day, but we still try. So, I think the good thing about the culture at Wise is that we're pretty customer obsessed. So we have different inputs, and I'll go through a couple of inputs. One is a NPS survey, Net Promoter Score survey, which helps us to gauge our customers' happiness levels. And this gets aggregated as frequently as you want. So sometimes I'll look at it weekly, sometimes I'll look at it monthly, just depending on the types of problems I'm looking for. Another input is the customer support team. They're super valuable. We really, really appreciate them being on the front lines, and they give us really important insights that we otherwise wouldn't have, because they're the ones facing all the complaints on the calls all day, right? So that's a really important input. A third one is I actually host customer sessions. So on a monthly basis, I host a session called Customers and Coffee. And I'll invite two customers to meet with the product team. We'll have breakout sessions, and it's really cool because on one end, you're inspiring your team. You're not becoming a barrier. You're not the only person that interacts with customers, right? So by doing that, the engineering team can actually meet with the customers and imagine who they're solving for as they're building, which is really cool. On the other end, the customer feels like they have they have to say in our building process. And they do, because we want to make sure we're serving their needs. So I really enjoy that session as well. And you'll see this with other sessions we have as a group. So we'll have our annual company mission days, and it's a really awesome few days where the entire company celebrates how much we've accomplished each quarter. And we'll also invite customers to the panel. So we like to embed them as part of the team per se.
Wow, that's really awesome. Customers and coffee, I love that.
Virtually, for now.
Yeah, for now. Yeah. Joe, what about you?
Taking notes over here. There's some good tips from Christine. I will say this gets harder and harder as you find that you're focused more on people management and your job is recruiting and hiring and HR and building processes to help your team scale. It can be easy to lose touch with the customer. So it's a real challenge that you really have to hold yourself accountable to. What I do is I've stayed in WhatsApp groups. I'm still in I think about 100 WhatsApp groups with different customers. And I don't often interact that much, but I want to see what are they asking about. Are they confused about a UI? Is there something that they want? And I normally we've got teams of account managers and of course product managers and customer success that are in there. But I'm always monitoring and seeing if I can help, if I can contribute, and reach out to that customer later and say, hey, the problem that you're mentioning, we don't have a solution for that yet, but we're thinking of building it. Do you mind if we include you and do you want to co-create with us? Would you want to be included in the study? And so you're going to have to make a lot of design decisions, or your staff will. So your customers, it's amazing. You get free user research. You get free advice on what they want. So your customers are a huge asset, and they can co-create with you. If you're not sure what to do, ask them. You can figure out what the next products are that you want to build or how you want to enhance your product. But your roadmap really should be governed by your customers. So stay in those WhatsApp groups or Viber groups if you're in the Philippines. And as Christine said, anyone who's really client facing. So your customer success team, look at all the tickets they raise, all the questions they raise. Just ask your CS team to show you the Zendesk tickets. What are the categories? What are the questions that are coming up? There's so much rich information in there. If you're more in the enterprise space, you might be doing quarterly business reviews with your larger customers. Maybe you've got an account management team. Go along with them. Go join the sales meeting. See how they pitch. See how sales pitches. How the customers ask. What the prospects ask. Just stay in touch with your account management team, sales team, and customer success team especially.
That's some great tips. Thank you both. I think let's move on to career. So there's a lot of people asking about how to become good PMs or how do they break into product management. So the first one, what are the traits of a good product manager? Maybe let's share the top 2 that you will look out for.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to give you different opinions. Personally, as a hiring manager, I look for, top 3. Okay. One is product sense, and that is, do you know what a good product looks like? Why? Why is that a good product? What makes a good product? So I think having some sort of opinion about that is really important, because you're going to be having to gauge situations where you don't have enough data, but you need to make a decision. So what do you do? How do you create some sort of plan based off of not having enough, but needing to still add your product sense to carry the team through and actually be making these right bets, right? Secondly is the thoroughness and ability to switch context out of micro and macro conversations. So you need to be super detailed at times, but you also need to be able to get the high level understanding of majority of topics that you probably didn't know anything about in the first place, but be able to synthesize and understand end to end across a gazillion conversations is really important. So I think that's important. I call it thoroughness and ability to navigate macro and micro context. I need to find a better word for that. And then the third one is the ability to get stuff done. So at the end of the day, you can have amazing plans, but if you can't execute, then I think that's a fatal flaw, right? So being able to share examples of how, even despite having just 2 engineers to work with, were you able to launch something and still make a meaningful impact on the business? Yep. What about you, Joe?
I would say top of the list for me would be high empathy. And you really have to, again, going back to empathizing with your customers' pains, you should feel your customers' pains. You should feel the pain that they feel, right? And then once you can empathize, you activate such a larger part of your brain. And you don't have to get so tactical. You just sort of feel like, how can I solve this for them, right? You need that to drive your decision making. And so being able to talk to customers, you can have all the skills in the world, but if you're not talking to your customers and understanding what their real pain points are, you just want to build stuff, that's not going to be a good product manager. Second is a growth mindset. This is so important because product managers are going to come in with different levels of skills, and whatever skills you're coming in with, they're not going to be enough, right? But that's okay, because if you've got empathy and you've got a growth mindset, you know that you can build all the skills you need. Maybe that's stakeholder management. Maybe that's asynchronous or synchronous communication. Maybe it's project management, right? Maybe it's writing user stories and being clear and concise. Whatever it is, you're probably going to suck at it when you first get in there, and that's okay. As long as you've got the growth mindset and show that you're willing to iterate, be vulnerable, and just do what it takes to solve the customer's needs. And to Christine's point, the ability to execute at the end of the day, right? Product managers are way less strategy vision people that you think. You're going to be doing your strategy. You'll do that your first week of the quarter, and then you're done strategy for the quarter. Now it's execute. So you've got to be willing to get stuff done and pick up whatever skills you need along the way to do it.
Nice. I hope you're taking tips, all you aspiring PMs. And the next question we have, so a lot of people are also asking, what's the level of technical expertise, seeing that PMs usually have to work with engineering teams. So is it ideal, let's say, for PMs to be technically trained?
For me, I think it just depends, right? Like there's so many different products in the world. If you're going to be working on an AI B2B product, it might be very important for you to know that domain to be effective in your role. If you're same thing for if you're working on SaaS, that might require more technical skills. But for me, I've always been a consumer-facing PM, and I've not really worked on the back-end side, although that's always part of the entire experience. And I don't come from a CS background. While I thought that was important to have, I learned throughout my career that you can still learn on the job. Everyone's tech stack looks different as well. So, I just pull up a chair and sit next to the engineering team, have them walk me through how things talk to each other, how it all works. And I think that's actually what's important, is like understanding your product, no matter which product you manage, like going 3 levels deep to at least understand it, so that you can challenge the team on, why it takes 3 months to build. You can challenge the team on, hey, remember when this connects to this? Why aren't you trying it this way? So, I think being able to navigate those conversations is important, but will you actually be coding? No. And if you're coding as a PM, it means you probably need to get some additional support, or there's something, maybe there's a hiring issue there. But yeah, I think it does depend on what product you're looking after.
I just second that. So you're going to have really back-end products, like say you're working on a ledger. It's not on your website as a product, but it's so critical and it's the backbone of your business. And you're thinking about things like throughput, reliability. How can I handle, hundreds of transactions per second? You're going to want a more technical person in that position. Whereas if it's a more UX focused, mobile app, say thing, it's not as big, but you do need to understand the vocabulary. You don't need to know how to code, but imagine that your engineers are like cooks or chefs. And you're sort of running a restaurant, right? You don't actually need to be able to know how to cook. But if you don't know what's a protein and what's a vegetable and what's a carb, you're not going to have any respect in the kitchen, and it's going to be really hard for people to work with you. So just because you don't code or maybe you don't want to code, you still need to understand the back end, front end. You're going to have to learn to write some SQL because you're going to have to make data-driven decisions. But other than that, understand the ingredients. Understand, if there's microservices, what are the services? There's databases. Where's the data stored? Why is the data stored there? What do the flows look like? Can you draw out business process modeling diagrams? These are the technical skills you need, and it's way more important than knowing how to code. But you want to be able to have a high-level understanding of the ingredients in your system and how to talk about them and how to problem solve with your developers.
You're making me hungry.
I hope the both of you had dinner. If not, we are ending. Oh, I just saw that we are actually past time. I think, let's cover maybe 2 more questions before we end the session. Thanks a lot for staying with us. And yeah, so maybe on that note, I think there was a question about how someone applying to become a product manager, how can they make their resume competitive? What are some things that you will look out for that make them stand out?
Let's see. So first part of the question, I think we answered as part of like the traits we look for in a good PM. So for me, it was product sense, ability to navigate micro and macro details, and then getting your execution sense really high as well. Resume competition. Honestly, like I am still of the belief that you should be able to condense and prioritize what you show on your resume. So I get like 5-page resumes from, let's say, people that are just starting out, right? I think you don't need to do that, right? So if you're just starting out, maybe like 3 years of work experience, what's important is actually showcase on your resume, why are you the most qualified person for the job? And to do that, you need to be able to tell your story on your resume. So I see the resume as a representation of your story, but when you meet in person, you'll continue like getting the details of that. But it's already a big turnoff for me personally. If it's like 5 pages, it's telling me like, okay, way too much, you can't prioritize. And I also think it's important, to give really concrete examples of impact. So always looking at impact, like what have you shipped and why was that important? What was the impact that delivered for the customer and to the business? Those are definitely like the headliners that I look for. Yeah. Joe, any other ones?
Yeah, for me, like Christine said, 1 page is plenty. We don't look at the sum of what you did. We look at the average of what you did. So put your best stuff on there. And short, it's respectful of our time. Keep it to 1 page. That's great. What I look for is a bit untraditional. I don't care where you went to school, if you went to school, what your GPA was, or where you worked before. What I care about is what do you do in your free time? What intrinsically motivates you? I want to see what are you motivated to do outside of work or school. Ask yourself, why do you want to go into product management? Is it solving for a particular persona or a particular problem or a vision? Is there a skill that you're looking to hone? show me how you're doing that. You're not just reading blogs. Are you writing SQL in your free time if you want to get technical? Are you researching how microservices work? Are you focused on the UX side? Are you freelancing? Are you helping or volunteering to write business requirements or to do business needs analysis? And show me that you're doing this in your free time, separate from your work or school. Are you taking online classes? Something like this. I want to see that you've got this drive. And what you do outside of work and school tells me way more about you than what you do in work or school.
Yeah, so if you're looking to apply to be part of Christine or Joe's team, those are some awesome tips right there. And Christine, we have
so many things. I don't even know if I would have had passed your review.
Yeah. Joe has some high standards. Christine, we have a question for you. So Z asked, traditionally, tech and PM has been very male-dominated. Do you see more females entering PM as a career choice? What can be done to accelerate female representation? I think you are the best person to answer this because you also lead the woman.
Is this the mic drop moment?
Yep.
No, thank you for asking this question. I mean, it's an important topic, right? So it's still very much a problem, and we're still not at 50-50 yet, across various sectors, not just in fintech. I can share actually a really good kind of like three to five like things that we did at Wise to actually increase the number of female PMs. So I think sometime like early 2020, we had about 20% of our PM org that are female. And our aspiration is to get it to 50-50 by end of 2021. So it takes a lot, right? First, you have to examine the entire funnel from application, referral, sourcing, all the way down to screening, interviews, and then being hired. We criticized every part and kind of figured out, what were the problems within each step of the process. So these are things like introducing a women referral power week. So raising awareness and encouraging our internal teams to consciously consider referring more women. We extended the employee referral scheme to ensure that people internally are not just thinking of close connections, but maybe other candidates I never thought of who might be a good fit for Wise. We started interviewing more female PMs. So to understand, for example, what was discouraging them from applying in the first place. And we got some really interesting data about why they didn't even try to apply. And then from that data, we learned to modify the JD. So we wrote them in a way to ensure that our language and tone was not excluding or off-putting to potential candidates, and checked for gender-coded language bias, modifying statements about our commitment to build diverse teams, flexible working practices, just making sure it includes people that we want, to feel included. We published a lot more case studies, content and posts from our female PMs. We set targets with the recruitment team. So a lot of it doesn't happen overnight. You really do have to figure out what's broken with your process and what are you trying to achieve. And then from there, work with the different teams to identify tasks that you can take on in order to accelerate more female representation in product. Luckily in the APAC team, actually, we are majority female. I don't know if I should say the word luckily, but we hit our goals in the APAC team in Singapore, but there's still definitely more work to do. Yeah.
Wow, nice. I love that. I think you were sharing that the goal was to hit 50% by end of the year, and the APAC team has already hit that target.
Yes, but not global yet. So we're still working on it. Yeah.
And Joe, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I'm certainly not as qualified to speak, but I can talk about some of the things that we have been doing. One, I think, of the most effective things that we've done is we simply increase the referral bonus for women. So we have our employees can refer anyone, and they get a referral bonus if the person joins Zendit. But we bump that up an extra 50% for women. So we're actually incentivized from the inside, so that if you refer a woman, you get 50% more referral bonus. So it's a strong, it's still an extrinsic motivation, unfortunately, but it can be effective to get to that outcome that we're looking for. But I think more important than that is again, look for biases throughout your hiring process. So one thing we do at Zendit that's a bit untraditional is we everyone goes through usually a 2-day trial as part of the interview process. They usually take holiday from their last job, and we go through. It's a very strong work samples test. And one of the reasons we do this is I remember looking at the results of Project Oxygen, which is a huge project that Google did to try to figure out, what are the leading indicators we can look at before we hire someone to determine this person's performance. And they did a massive analysis of all the different sorts of filters that are put into the hiring process. And they found that, a lot of, especially tech companies, will often do sort of written tests or take-home tests as part of the process. And what Project Oxygen found out is that significantly and unfairly biases towards white males, and so they just stopped using it and went for screening methods that are less biased, and the least biased method, and which is also the most effective predictor of actual performance after hiring, is the work samples test. So which means it's like a case study, right? Like you do in management consulting. That has been just so rich for us. So it's a lot of work, but it gives the candidate a chance 2 days to really get to know us. They meet with like 10 people. They do a presentation to the entire panel. It's very involved, but it gives us all a chance to really evaluate each other. And it helps to reduce, at least according to this study, the bias where you might be filtering out because of gender bias at a very early stage. You want to make sure that everyone at least makes it all the way to that stage, and you're assessing as much as possible on merit as opposed to something you have no control over, like your gender.
Thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, I think those are really great initiatives. And yeah, we are looking forward to more females, not just in PMs, but in the tech industry as a whole as well. I think we have ran out of time. Thank you so much for staying with us, for all of you tuning in. And thanks a lot, Christine and Joe, for sharing your insights with our community as well.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us. We didn't manage to answer all the registration questions and the questions that came in from YouTube, but I think Christine and Joe would probably be more than happy to connect with you over LinkedIn. So do head over there to connect with them if you are looking to enter PM roles or if you have any questions. And I will be moving both of you to the virtual backstage. Thank you so much again for spending your Thursday evening together with us. And if you would like to watch the session, it's available on our YouTube and Facebook channels. And we regularly host events with developers and startup communities. So do subscribe and follow us on our social channels to keep updated with our events. And lastly, we would love to hear your feedback. Do let us know what you think about today's session by scanning the QR code and filling in a feedback form. It's going to take just less than a minute. And until then, stay tuned to our upcoming events and website and social channels, and we'll see you again next month.